So we're very pleased to have Robin Summers with us today. Let's welcome her.
Well, it's my great honor to introduce these three fine panelists to you. First is, in the center, is Jane Gottschall, who was born and raised and schooled in New Orleans. In January of 1945, Jane trained as a cabin attendant in one of the first Pan Am offered for women. When the war came along, the company began hiring women, among them Miss Gottschall. She subsequently flew the Latin American division out of New York until 1953, when she transferred to the West Coast and flew the Pacific route. She then went on to management, serving as a flight service supervisor in the Alaska Pacific Division, and she wound up her career this way. Jane is one of the first women who served on the international routes, and she is a pioneer in her field. She wrote her memoir, which is a compendium of tales, titled As Pistons Flew, which was published in 1998, to describe from a woman's point of view how it was to work for the airlines. Then we have Thomas Kewin, who served as a flight engineer for Pan Am for 40 years, 31,000 hours in the air on crafts from the China Clipper to the Jumbo 747. Tom grew up not far from here in Modesto. He was accepted to Stanford, but he chose to attend Boeing School of Aeronautics to fulfill his dream to fly. He spent the war in the flying boats and Navy patrol bombers and was hired by Pan American Airways as a flight engineer in 1943 and continued this position for 40 years. His memoir, The Pan Am Journey, came out this year. At least that's what it says in the jacket of your book. I hope that's correct. 2005. Was motivated to write this book by his desire to provide an accurate portrayal of the flying boats. Robert Blake was born in Quantico, Virginia. His father was a Marine officer who served in 3 wars. Bob graduated from MIT and became a naval aviator in World War II with the Ready Reserve, thereafter flying TBMs, Corsairs, and Cougars. He joined Pan Am in 1941 to work on the Boeing 314 flying boats in New York, where he was based for the majority of his career, but he's gotten around. He took a hand in the development of the 707 and the 747 aircraft. He's written 2 self-published books, Bayonets and Bougainvilleas, which was published in 2001, and From Belleau Wood to Bougainville, published in 2004. And I'm going to let Bob begin. I want to say one thing first before you start, just a little prelude. Beginning on a personal note, your memoir is quite a tribute to your father, I would say, Bayonets and Bougainvilleas. It's about growing up and the child of a naval officer on the move that includes historical events and cultural commentary spanning both world wars into his adult Pan Am career, covering the sad and untimely death of his mother and the death of his father in 1983. A portion of the story, which is interesting, takes place before he was born, as early as 1894. And if you don't mind me starting with the question, I was wondering how you were able to piece together your memoir.
Well, I had some documents which were very helpful. It started when my father died. I had the opportunity to read the oral history interview that the Marine Corps had done he was one of a number of officers, career officers, that the Marine Corps Historical Organization had chosen to do their own oral history program. So I had the opportunity to read that, and the thing that I noticed was that the military oral history people like to focus on military matters, battles, that sort of thing. And the family side of military life was almost completely slid over. And two particular areas that had been important in my childhood were the year that we spent in Spain before the Spanish Civil War, and the 2 years that we spent in Panama when I was in high school down there. And those were, bullets were not flying, so the interviewer didn't really ask about those. And it seemed to me a shame that he had not. So I volunteered to fill in the blanks. And Bennis Frank, the Marine Corps historian who had interviewed my father, said that was fine, and he sent me a tape so that I could dictate it, just like it had happened with my father. Well, I found that I couldn't work with tape. I had my little old portable typewriter is what I had to use. So I started pounding away, starting with the areas that I thought had been slid over. But by the time I was through, I had basically a memoir of my father's entire life. There were other sources besides that. The Marine Corps was very good. They gave me a complete set of my father's orders, so I could have dates and such things as the fact that he had gotten special mention when he was a captain for having his gun crew had set the highest score ever made with a particular battery on a battleship. And those were little things that I was able to use to get into the book. Also, I was fortunate in that the last time we had visited my father's parents, my grandfather and grandmother were getting old then, and Dad made the point of sitting down with them and getting their life story, which then became available to me. And that gave me some facts. And then I had my mother's 10-year diary from 1931 to 1941, covering our travels abroad. And that was the source material that I started with. And I had books on the Marine Corps that I could use for certain other things. So I had a good fortune of having right at hand plenty of good and factual material that would get dates and places and the names of people accurately. So I hope that answers your question.
Sure.
Go
ahead.
Just to let you know a little bit about my dad, so that you'll be wanting to read the book. Although he was born in Seattle, the family moved to the Bay Area when he was still in elementary school. He graduated from Berkeley High and the University of California. Classmate was my mother, so this is a real California book. And in fact, they are all, when they died, my father, my mother, my stepmother, and my wife, my first wife. I have a very nice lady that I married just a year ago this month. And
All right.
I was a widower, and I was a Pan Am widower, and she was a Boeing widow, and we made good music together. That part did not get into these books, unfortunately. So this is a local story as well as a Marine Corps story, and I must say that it is also a Pan Am story, because woven through this book which is the basic book, is where we were when I was growing up. My father was first became aware of Pan American Airways when he was in Nicaragua in the 1920s, and Pan American was just starting down through Central America. David Del Valle's father was working in Brownsville and later in the Canal Zone. So there are people right here in this room that you all know that are in this book. Others that some of you would, I'm sure you know. Ann Archibald, she was a Marine officer, the widow of a Marine officer, Marine aviator killed in Nicaragua. Many of you know that she ran the Washington office for all during World War II, and she had people like Hap Arnold jumping when she called him. She's in the book. Many other people that you will know, John Borger is in there. Charlie's father is in this book too. I don't know whether Charlie got into the book or not. So aside from military history, it is also a little bit of Pan American Airways history.
Good. Let me ask you a question. We spoke about this, the writing of the book and also the publishing. You said that you joined a writers group in order to help you along and get some support, and then also took some seminars on publishing. Would you talk about that just a little bit, and also help us get over some of the glitches in case there are others of us interested in writing memoir out in the audience?
Well, I'm sure a lot of you do have a manuscript either in process or you're thinking about it. Just for the sake of argument, can I have a show of hands of people who are writing or want to write a book? Okay, well, I can't really give you a lot of advice. I can only tell you what I did and how this book got published. I'll have to say that the writing was the easiest part. From the time my father died until the first book came out was almost 20 years. About 3 years of that was doing the writing, getting people to read it and help correct it. I had a friend who's a history professor who has written some respected books, and he writes well. And he knows good writing and knows bad writing, and he was very encouraging. And one of the things that he said was, you're going to have a hard time finding a publisher. Write the book anyway and get it published, even if you have to pay for it yourself, because the story needs to be told. So bear that in mind.
That's good advice. And we have, for those of you who are interested in writing your memoir, many of these available to you for free from Ex Libris, which is a self-publishing house, and I think all three of you used Ex Libris. Am I correct? No?
No.
What do you use?
There are several. There is mine. I'll just tell you, I did join a writers association in the Pacific Northwest, and they had annual seminars, and lots of writers going there, and they have publishers to come and listen. But if you talk to the publisher, unless they think you really have a bestseller, why you're not going to sell your book. But you have to keep plugging away. And actually, what eventually happened to me, there were plenty of people down there that ghostwriters that would be glad to write my book for me and see that it gets published. Well, over my dead body, for this kind of a book anyway. For my own story, well, even my own story, I'd want to write it myself. So I set the book aside. I got it typed, put it on a disc. Publishers all want their stuff on disc now. And then it just sat. And all of a sudden, one day, I had a letter from an outfit called First Books Library, and they told what they would do. And the interesting thing about them was you didn't have to really buy any books. This is a print-on-demand outfit, and they sell the books on the internet, and they also are on Amazon. They're on the Amazon list. They're on the everybody's list. You can go to any bookstore and ask for this book by my title or author's name or ISBN number, and they can get it for you. And you will pay the recommended publisher's price, and I don't have to buy 1,000 books and go out and sell them all over the country. So that was an advantage to me as far as these people were concerned. There's one, iUniverse is another one. That's associated with Barnes & Noble. I don't have any experience with them, but I was at a book fair a couple of years ago, and there were a bunch of us lined up like this, and several of us were First Books Library. They're now called Author House, and a couple were iUniverse, and there were various different ones. And there was even somebody who had done it the old-fashioned way, who had gone to a printer and put out a real lot of money to get their book printed, and it was a nice book, but I don't know that they got any more publicity for it than we did. I can go into that.
Yeah, that's
but
nice.
I better let somebody else talk, I think.
And we're going to have time for questions after each of our panelists have presented what they have to say. And that's good to know, though, that there's some marketing done for you when you self-publish. Tom has said that his creative endeavor was a long, painful process. And I wonder, I know it was worthwhile because I've read the book and it's a lovely book, but I wonder if you could tell us something about what inspired you to write the memoir.
I guess Jane gets to come last, huh? All right.
Did you get all the questions?
I see, all right. About 5 years ago, I subscribed to a number of these magazines about old airplanes. And about 5 years ago, I read an article describing a flight to Hawaii on the Boeing 314 Clipper. And the author didn't have any idea what he was writing about. I learned later that he doesn't even know how to fly an airplane. But he passed this off as the real true story about how you're supposed to do this and what they did. And it made me so mad that I sat down and started writing what I remembered about operating that airplane to Honolulu. So I wrote this thing about how they really did operate that airplane. And I started reading it, and I wrote it on my computer. And I'd keep looking at that computer screen. And finally, I printed it and went in the other room and sat down in a different chair and read it and found I had a lot of corrections to make. I can't make corrections on the computer screen, but I can make it when I've got a piece of printed paper in my hand. Anyhow, I sent that off to some of my airline friends and asked for their comments on it. And they gave me some comments and said, well, you know, you should write some more, Tom, about what went on. And a few of us talked about it. And quite a few of us in the room here today were involved in Pan American during World War II. Most people don't realize that in 1942, Pan American base in San Francisco went from 4 airplanes to 19 airplanes because of the Navy contract. and it was a tremendous expansion and a tremendous training program, and that's how I came into the company. So I wanted to write about that, about what happened during World War II and what we did, and we're very proud of that. But you won't find that written up anywhere. So I had two things I wanted to write about. And then I kept on going and kept writing about what I did for the rest of my 40 years with Pan American. I think the bottom line comes down to I had something I wanted to say. I had a story I wanted to tell, and I knew that there aren't very many people who want to read this book unless they work for the airline or admired the airline. So the only way you can do that is to self-publish. Now let me say that early on I sent a couple of chapters to Mr. Ron Davies, the authority, if there is one, on aviation publishing. And he encouraged me. He copy edited the first two chapters I sent to him and sent them back to me and said he liked it and I should keep on writing. And so I did. But of course, this book is not in a category that can be published by somebody like Ron Davies because the market isn't there for it. But what I'm here to say is that, you know, if you have a story you want to tell and you can sit down and write it, then it's easy to get it published. You just have to pay for it. But it doesn't cost very much. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
It can be as low, according to this, as low as $1,000 if you take the,
500.
you know, the sort of the basic, and then on up to several thousand.
Yeah.
But it's inspiring me to publish some of my stuff just so that I have it in hard copy. And then who knows what'll happen, but at least it's there. Well, Tom, in your one of your chapters, you write that the post-war years brought something really startling. Stewardesses.
We got stewardesses.
Stewardesses.
Yes.
And
I
so,
remember it well.
I'm going to let Jane talk a little bit, and then we'll have a lot of time for questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions for these three.
Well, the first steward.
Unless there's something more you want to say.
Oh, no.
And in fact, it was Jane who actually supported the writing of your memoir.
That's right. Yeah.
And you've acknowledged that in the first
Oh,
page.
she whipped me terribly along. But no, the Pan American suddenly decided they needed stewardesses, and out of the blue, a girl named Hope Parkinson transferred from Miami to San Francisco as the first stewardess. And I ran into her down there, and I went into shock because I had known this girl since she was 12 years of age. She was from Sacramento, I was from Modesto. She came up to my grandmother's summer cabin up on the Sonora Pass every summer for a week as a guest of our family. And we swam together, and we rode horseback together, and became close friends. And then all of a sudden, here she was as the first stewardess flying out of San Francisco for the airline. And I guess that was 1946. And it took me 6 years before I finally married her.
Okay, Jane. Jane's memoir is not just this exterior journey of Pan Am, and there's a lot about Pan Am and a lot of different places that she travels to, but it's also an interior journey of the heart. And I want Jane to tell us about the experience of writing a memoir and really getting to those parts that maybe you didn't even expect. The honesty.
This morning, about 4 a.m., I woke up and said, Jane, what are you doing going to talk to a lot of people today? I think I'd rather be at 30,000 feet over the ocean and 2 feathered engines. And I'd feel a lot safer, more secure. But I thank you for having me and for you all being here. About 1954, I had an experience that later made me think I should write a book. Because, yes, I was one of Pan Am's first stewardesses. And when I look up here and see this airplane, that was the first one outside of the Boeing 307, which is the flying cloud that you have back in Washington, D.C. now. That was the first plane I worked. But this one, well, one dark night, if there's ever a dark night around here, I'm going to bring a ladder and some paint and paint it in Pan Am colors. That was my plane. But I flew that and all the other Douglases and the Constellation around the world and the Boeing Stratocruiser. And I don't think anybody could have had a more wonderful youth than I had. All the people I met, the wonderful people, the hundreds of celebrities we carried. And this was all in the 1940s and 50s before the influx of a lot of tourist trade. And so you only had so many people on board, and there were a lot of celebrities. There were people from representing their country and their companies. And so it was quite interesting to meet the people we did. But one thing happened about 1954 that made me think about writing a book about it later. I volunteered I was living in Burlingame, and I volunteered to solicit for United Way in my neighborhood, which was all mostly apartment buildings except for one little house on the corner that was hidden behind a lot of foliage and a little white picket fence. And I walked up to the gate and unlatched the gate, and a cowbell rang, which alerted whoever was in the house. Knocked on the door, and a voice said, "Please come in." And she sounded like she wanted somebody to come in, and I did. It was so dark, I couldn't see inside. And she apologized for it because she was almost blind. And when my eyes got used to the dark, I saw it was a little old lady, must have been 100 years old. And to make a long story short, she asked me, "How and when did you come across?" And I thought, come across? And she said, "You're not Californian." I said, "Oh no, I came across in my little Chevy last year." She said, "Well, I came across in a covered wagon." And I thought, my goodness, she is 100 years old. And what I was so sorry I didn't have a tape recorder with me, because if I had taken down the stories that she told me, those were pioneering days of this country that she was talking about. And then I thought 50 years later, I was a pioneer too, but I was a pioneer 100 years later, and it should be written about. The 40s and 50s back in the Piston days, when women were first used by Pan American as flight attendants, because there were only men before. And I feel I'm proudest of having been one of Pan Am's first stewardesses. That makes me feel great, really. But I finally got around to writing about it, and I didn't like having to send off information to various publishing companies, because I only got these nice little letters that came back, which weren't very personal. And one even sent me a postcard. But and there were a couple that were complimentary and nice, but it just wasn't their type of works that they published. So in a computer meeting a group of people who talked about writing, an agent that belonged to that writers group suggested self-publishing. And that's how I thought about it, that would be an excellent idea. After all, I was in my 70s. I couldn't wait around for somebody to say they were going to publish my book. I wanted to see it done, and I wanted to see it published. And I wanted it while all my friends were still around, too. So that's the route I went, and I'm not sorry I did. They just do everything for you. Gave me a couple of websites on which the very first chapter of my book can be read right on the website. in Barnes and Noble and Borders and any other book company, you can read my first chapter right on your computer. So that got me into it, and I'm not sorry I did it that way. And I suggest anybody, you could just put your book on a little floppy about this big. That's all you have to do, and mail it in. I think they have the ring size ones today, but it didn't. My whole book went on that little floppy. Yeah. I could have put 2 books on that little floppy. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a lot. And then they send you back the galleys. Now, I always thought a galley was a kitchen on an airplane or a boat, but I found out a galley is something they send you back. Your writing is all printed up, and you're to go through it and see if there's any further corrections you want to make. And everything's done for you. They gave me, I think, 40 chances to change things, and so I pushed around a few commas and sentence structures. I dedicated my book to Virginia Royce Valentine, whose husband was a Pan Am pilot, and she was a stewardess. And both of us were going to write a book together, but she passed away, and so I took it on myself. And I wrote a preface and forgot to write in acknowledgments. Don't forget that. By the time my book was printed, it was too late. I don't know, what else can I talk about here?
I don't know, but I think they probably have to buy the book if they want to get the parts about the romance. Right?
Oh.
That's just a teaser. Well, I don't know. Let's see if there are any questions in the audience that anybody has about publishing or writing. Anybody?
We have lined up a printer, but he is a printer. He will take the floppy disk and he'll print off a galley, and then he'll print off as many copies as we ask him for. However, he does absolutely no marketing. Do you recommend that we go with somebody that can market the book?
These outfits that do this print on demand, they will help you with marketing. They'll give you kits and materials to use, that kind of thing. But they don't do any marketing. You're on your own there. But I remember a friend of mine, 7 years ago, wrote what he thought was a great mystery novel. And he took it to a printer. And of course, the more books you order, the cheaper the price. So he bought 30,000 copies. Still has 29,000. The big thing, as James said, about the print-on-demand type of thing is this book never goes out of print. It takes a few days for an order to be printed and mailed to you, and somebody orders it. But you don't have a big investment in the books that you put in. So if your book is going to sell 20,000, 30,000 copies, then you talk to Ron Davies down. If it's only going to sell 500 copies, why you go to print on demand?
And there is, in this Ex Libris, there's a little part here, marketing services. They have a starter kit for $125, and posters and press release campaign for another $300, and a publication announcement, and all sorts of different services that they offer in the area of marketing.
Well, I didn't write my book to make money. I wrote it because it was something I had to say. And I think I spoke for a lot of people that did the same thing I did. All I wanted to do was get back what I put into it, what I paid for it. But I suppose if you want to sell a lot of books, you have to push. I'm not much of a pusher on that sort of thing.
Well, I also found that the print-on-demand books, and I've been happy with the one that I have, but their press releases, I bought, for the first book, I bought their press release service, and they sent out, I forget how many hundred press releases to newspapers all over the country. not one response to
No.
any of those, except the only people that I got reviews from were people that I beat on the door myself in person. And I think you're going to have to do that. These publishers will be glad to sell you certain services, but they don't invest their own money to go to bookstores and so on.
Yeah, you have to be careful with the print on demand, that you don't make a whole bunch of changes as you go along.
Every time you make a change, they charge you for it.
Not only that, you have to get a new ISBN number if you make substantial changes.
I guess if you make a number of changes, you would, yeah.
It's considered a different edition.
No, the thing is, you've got to have the book finished, completely finished. And then you mail it off on a floppy disk and an envelope of photographs. And from there on, everything else is done by email, the whole thing. And a month, 6 weeks later, why, they send you a box of books.
Well, if you were good enough to buy my book, you'll find that I tried to correct some things. Like I said, Star Wars instead of Star Trek, so I scratched out the wars and put in the Trek.
Sort of an autograph. I have one. Yeah.
Experience that I published a book 2 years ago on Imperial Airways in England, and it was done by a philatelic trust in England, so they paid for the printing, which was good. But their printer was a little bit old-fashioned, and they wanted the whole thing on hard copy, laser printout, and they wouldn't take it on disc electronically. And the illustrations leave something to be desired because they were making copies of copies. So, and most of my illustrations, like aircraft, were all digital scans. So you have to be careful with that. That a printer that will only take it on hard copy is not going to be very good at all. Not as good anyway.
One method that might be of interest to some people, if you want to sort of break in without getting far into it, a local newspaper started publishing my aviation stories every Friday for most of last year. And this year I just finished a 40-chapter book on another subject, and every Friday they're publishing one of these stories. And I'm building up my nerve to be like Tom here or something and send them and get them done in the book form. But in the meantime, it's kind of nice because you get a lot of feedback from people that are reading these things. And, so it's a way to kind of get your feet wet.
Robin, can I put in one last plug for my book?
Oh, please.
For those of you who are interested in celebrities, we carried a lot of celebrities on Pan Am because they've traveled all over the world. They had the money to do it. And I had people like Marilyn Monroe and Bob Hope and Alfred Hitchcock and William Holden, and there's all in my book.
Danny Kaye. Was Frank Sinatra mentioned in
Frank
there?
Sinatra, oh,
Yeah.
no, he taught me how to heat a baby bottle. At least he thought he did.
William Holden. Yeah. Oh.
As a crew member, as a woman crew member,
Yes.
did you ever have occasion to pick some passenger out who might hijack the airplane?
You know, we never worried about things like that. The cockpit door was open. You could walk in there, and of course you asked permission to go in there. But everybody was welcome, and there was no such, you didn't worry about things like that. You never even thought about it. Another age.
Yeah.
Just a tale that I have to relate because it happened to a Pan Am guy. At a Berlin reunion, there was a fellow named Joe Dieter. Probably some of you people have known when he flew out of the West Coast. But I ran into him, and the Germans had an expression, Schadenfreude, and he was very gleeful about the situation. He was married to a British gal who they divorced, and she was years later involved with a publisher. And he wanted to marry her, and she said, "I don't think you can afford it." Well, that's Joe Dieter. But he told me that gleefully one day that a woman walked into his office and said, "I've got a manuscript here, nobody will read it, will you read this thing?" Well, he read it, it was Harry Potter, and that was the end of his relationship with his ex-wife, so Joe was happy about that. So maybe you have to comment if you do it.
Yeah. You know, before we get too far away, can I say something else, Robin? One of the great things I think about this exercise of expressing yourself and trying to write a book is the benefits you receive. I would sit in the evening at my computer and write a chapter and print it and go sit in the other room and read it. And then about 3 o'clock the next morning, I'd wake up and start thinking about that. And little things would come floating up in my mind, memories that I had forgotten I had. That the exercise of writing that chapter would jar these things loose. And you have fresh memories, old memories, but fresh, that keep coming up. And it was remarkable over a period of time, the things that I would remember from out of the depths of the memory there. And then in sending off pages to friends to have them read it and comment, their comments would kick off memories. So from a little idea of, well, I think I'll write a chapter about operating the 314, over a period of 6 months, it was amazing what evolved out of that. So personally, I enjoyed it immensely because of just that very facet of it, that it was bringing back refreshing memories that I'd long forgotten about. I'll recommend it. It's fun.
Talking of memories, in the recent couple of years, I have talked with a few of my friends and realized I think there's something missing. And that is, we are not passing on our children. This is the children. Just keep telling them over and over. Keep a diary. Keep a diary. Keep a diary.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Every morning, I mean, just like I want you to the day before, but keep a diary because it's when you get up to my age, you're too old to even think sometimes. You look back and you say, I don't remember that. I remember that I said that. If they had a diary, you'd even be able to go back and tell people when you did things instead of tell them when you did it. But I can't remember when I did it. Maybe you had to record it, even a couple of sentences. But you just get the kids to keep a diary, keep a diary.
I kept a diary, and I took from my diary a lot that I wrote. I kept a diary, I had log books, and all the letters I sent home to my mother and father, and I used to write them after every trip just about. Long pages of describing everything I saw, everything I did, well, almost everything I did. And I put everything in folders by years, and it helped me in writing. If you're writing a book, it helps you to sort your information. And I'm a terrible paper saver. I got a computer to get rid of paper and only built up more.
I might add a little addendum to what he's saying here. I've kept diaries since 1947, and that's what I write from. But the word diary, particularly for men, is like no, everybody looks at you. What I would say to him, the only thing is say to them, like as you did, a logbook. It's undercover wording. It works beautiful, but it's my kids saying, I keep saying that. Diary, Dad, what are you talking about?
Well, actually, I have the little pocket diaries that the GE and Pratt & Whitney used to have back when I was somebody that they would give things to. Why, every year I'd get either a GE or a Pratt & Whitney pocket diary. It had maps in it. It had lots of stuff, and you had, about 3 days per page, and you don't have to write all your secret stuff, but if you had an appointment with Juan Tripp on a certain day, why, there it is, and you can say, that was the day.
Here's the diary over here.
And I have them going, yeah, you have to buy, well, no, I get them, now I get them from my alumni association, but.
I got a beautiful T-shirt from Dan Whitney with a great big logo on the front. Hasn't helped me remember Dan.
I just want to ask the panelists, I've been thinking of writing one, and I was wondering if you think this would sell. It would be titled Memorable Crew Parties. With names.
Just don't forget the details.
I should write a few chapters for that.
All three of these books, I have to say, have these beautiful details. So when you're writing your memoir, remember that. I remember the 9 rubies. Oh, and the star sapphire. And then there's this beautiful image of Bob when he was a young man leaving Spain with his mother on a different form of transportation than his father, who was taking a bicycle. And that was just so powerful for me. So as you're writing your memoir, remember those details. Even if they don't seem important, they are very important to the reader. They create those images that just stay with us. We have time, I think, for one more question. We need to wrap it up. Yes, right here.
I think this could be good marketing project if each one of you would just tell one very interesting event you remember from your life or your book with Pan Am, because that's a great marketing tool. People hear one little bit that's very interesting. More interesting versus the new book.
Thank you.
So one little event that you found very interesting.
I think that's important, and particularly a gimmick in your first chapter to draw people in to read it. My first chapter was about my landing in the jungles of Guatemala, and in those days, nothing went in the newspaper like they do today. You have a flat tire, and it's in the newspaper today. But that was quite an interesting experience for me.
And then I know the beginning of Tom's was the image of the flying boat taken off out of San Francisco Bay. And then the next chapter is this young man standing on the shore at the World's Fair. That would be Bob, watching this same plane, you know. So that was a pretty gripping beginning. Anyway, I want to thank the audience for being for participating in this conversation. You've been wonderful. And we could spend a full hour talking to every single one of you. But time's up. If you want to talk to them, you can come up afterwards, and they have books available that they'll sign for you. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, Ben. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Bob, to Jane, to Tom for telling their stories and then telling the story about telling their story. It's wonderful. The idea about the diary is very important, and I'll tell you, my son is 6 years old, and he's on the verge of learning to write. And it's very exciting because he told me the reason he wants to learn to write is so that he can keep a diary, a logbook, a journal, whichever term we want to use. But he is very excited about that prospect, so that was a very wise piece of advice. And the only other word I have to say, other than to express tremendous thanks for Robin Summers for conducting this marvelous panel, is that in the words of that company up near you, Bob, Nike, I think it is, what do they say? Just do it. So if you're thinking about it, start doing it. Thank you all very much. We're going to resume in about 15 minutes.